First of all, I'd like to say that in Canada, at the Calgary Institute for Transpersonal and Integrative Sciences, we have been offering clinical parapsychological services for 20 years. Now, I define that as the integration of, perhaps we should say ESP and psychokinesis, or psi, psychical experiences, intuition, and spirituality. I know that John Klimo came up with that same definition in 1989. So basically, there's enough evidence that we can actually say parapsychology is an applied science. Now, let me see if I can figure out how to work this. Good. All right, thank you. So today I'd like to expand upon the following conversation: why and how we need to further develop clinical parapsychology, who needs help and ways we can help, establishing ethical and respectful cross-cultural practices, and also what specific skills we should have. My focus just evolved from more than 45 years in parapsychology, starting in 1974 as a summer study student at the Institute for Parapsychology under J.B. Rhine. I followed that working with Bill Roll as a field investigator for psi disturbances and all kinds of interesting things. I also acted as a liaison to the Department of Parapsychology at JFK University, and then under Lloyd Auerbach, when he developed the Office of Paranormal Investigation, acted as their expert intuitive, which was a term developed by Dr. Bill Kautz in San Francisco to describe his psychics, mediums, and channels. I never used that term myself. As many of us know, connected with psi disturbances, there's often an underlying trauma. In 1981, I received a master's in clinical psychology that focuses on the biopsychosocial psychological phenomena. And also I have a master's in transpersonal psychology, which looks at the spiritual phenomena, which would include expanded states of consciousness, spiritual emergencies, non-local consciousness. One of the things that I noticed when I was teaching at Antioch University in the Department of Clinical Psychology, I was teaching cross-cultural as well as clinical psychology. And it appeared to me, and is there a way to make this not do automatic roll so that I can do it? No? Well, it might go at a different level than me. So let me go back. All right, we're going too far here. All right. So it became clear to me that the psychic, psychological, and spiritual phenomena are actually all braided together as opposed to distinct areas. And in addition to that, it also became clear, at least in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was living and working at the time, that there was a proliferation of psychic self-help courses in psychic development, in healing, in energy work, and now what's called New Age and shamanism. There was a call from the community, which has only increased over time. So in 1989, I did my PhD dissertation on a community model for the uses of intuition in clinical practice, which was actually looking at how the trauma experience brings us in contact with something called a psychic death that awakens the possibility of a spiritual rebirth. In fact, this concept of psychic death to spiritual rebirth and renewal is something that's quite common cross-culturally in the rites of passage or ceremonies of initiation. It's from the study of those ceremonies of initiation that I came up with the term a trauma-induced spiritual awakening, where essentially we go through a crisis and a shock that then brings forward during rites of purification all kinds of traumas, spiritual traumas, physical trauma, mental trauma, emotional trauma, which the initiate, whether it's indigenous cultures or ancient cultures, is then required to get down to the bare bones, to go through a psychic death to let go of the past, and actually, in a manner of speaking, discover life after death through the use of intuitive, spiritual, and psychic resources. That spiritual, intuitive, psychic capacity actually inspires the individual for a spiritual rebirth, and it's the return to their community where they then share lessons learned and gifts received during the ceremony of initiation. So going back here, I wrote in depth about that in my book, Journey from Betrayal to Trust, A Universal Rite of Passage. I also had an opportunity to test this under the most severe circumstances in Banda Aceh, which was 5 minutes from the epicenter of the 2004 tsunami disaster, which I'm sure you're familiar with. That 60-foot wave took 190,000 people on December 24th, and then spread across to 12 other countries. In Aceh, they were also suffering from 30 years of civil war. I was contacted by Dr. Manti Satyadharma from the International Council of Psychologists, the former director for them. He was also a past president of the Asian Psychology Association. He knew of my work and thought it was especially important to have a trauma recovery program to upgrade the training for psychologists in Indonesia that integrated spirituality into the recovery program, because in Indonesia, as in 2/3 of the world's population, spirituality is woven into the culture. I had an opportunity when we went to Aceh on the anniversary to do a pre-test and post-test of trauma symptoms while training volunteer recovery workers who were primarily social work students. And after the 10-day training, there was really some significant results. We followed up 90 days later with narratives from journal entries, which I then presented at the International Council of Psychologists Peace, International Relations, and Human Rights Conference that was held in Greece in 2006. That brought an invitation to present those results to the United Nations in New York, and then, of course, when Haiti happened, I was invited by a United Nations NGO to help bring this possible kind of integration of psychic, spiritual, and intuitive work as the core of healing. Now, between 2004 and 2010, there was the awareness of how resilience is deeply connected with spirituality. So, just again, to remind the context, CITES has been providing clinical parapsychology support for 20 years by integrating psychic resources, intuition, and spirituality into clinical practice. CITES is asking the PA to help refine a universal definition that would help other healing institutions better understand, accept, and integrate clinical parapsychology into their professional spheres. Maybe we can begin in our conversations here today looking at standards of practice, correlating the pathologic definitions, and also meeting at our role as clinicians, as healers. For discussion, I'd like to just present, I'm sure some of you are very familiar with this already if you are a member of other international psychology organizations. In 2008, the Universal Declaration of Ethical Principles for Psychologists was adopted by the International Union of Psychological Sciences, among many other organizations. It was also presented at the United Nations Department of Information Symposium for NGOs. There are 4 primary principles: respect for the dignity of persons and peoples, competent caring, integrity, and last but not least, professional and scientific responsibility to society. So I just want to make sure that I have time to describe these before it goes to the next slide. Respect for the dignity of persons and peoples includes understanding the value of indigenous and cross-cultural spiritual healing traditions that have been around for millennia, thousands of years, and are really worthy of research. Competent caring includes bringing to bear our own competencies in terms of training, expertise, experience, and working within standards of practice according to our licenses. Integrity has to do with understanding our personal biases, as well as our professional biases, and understanding how our biases may interact with the biases of those individuals that we are assisting, as well as the communities that we're here to help. And of course, minimizing conflicts of interest. And then professional and scientific responsibility to society is something that we, of course, in parapsychology understand in relationship to evidence and to all of the different ways that we approach validating phenomena. It's also very important to realize that scientific responsibility and professional responsibility never supersedes respect for the dignity of persons and peoples. These are rank ordered on purpose. And if you're interested, you can find out more about them. I have the source here for you, and I'd be happy to discuss it with you as well. So the need is obvious. 70% of men and 81% of women in Iceland reported some type of psychic experience. A 90% of 4,000 in a self-selected internet survey of participants from 60 countries reported at least one type of paranormal encounter, according to a report from the Australian Institute of Parapsychology. And the Asian Journal for Public Opinion Research noted a steady trend for more and more people believing that clairvoyance exists. There may be those who need help as well as intervention when they start exploring or expressing their psychic and spiritual experiences. So let's look at who needs help and how we need to help them. Medical doctors and nurses, psychotherapists, etc., could benefit from qualified continuing education for helping professionals. Licensed clinicians, as well as mediums, psychics, shamans, and New Age healers can benefit from supervision and clinical consultation. And, of course, this is where I began, support for parapsychologists doing field investigations and research. We can offer differential diagnosis and referral. I have case examples in each of these areas. The next, in terms of forensic psychologists and judges who might need expert opinions, I can't say that I have experience with that, but I do know colleagues who do that kind of work. And of course, the general public also needs counseling, training, and education. So I'd like to invite us to explore how we might embrace our evolving role as scientists, healers, teachers, and leaders. This is a little article that I came upon when I was in Thailand last year. This is a Ngangari healer from Aborigine in Australia, and many Aboriginal healers now are being integrated into the hospitals in Adeline. I'd also like to mention that I had an opportunity to introduce grandmother Sarah Smith from the Turnal clan from the Mohawk Nation to the International Council of Psychologists as well, in sharing some of the ceremonies of the sharing circle, smudge ceremony, and the types of traditions that they have that establish health and well-being. I think that's something that we especially are poised to be able to build bridges. It's important for us to be able to share evidence with professional communities, to train ourselves and others to ethically address issues, and to be able to provide support, energetic healing, mental healing, emotional healing, spiritual healing, and physical healing. And I just want to do a time check. How's my time?
You have like 5 minutes if you want.
5 minutes, good. That's what I was hoping. I thought before I close, and I do have a little story to close with, I might ask if there are any single questions or comments, because that might shift the direction of how I close. So if there's any comment or question that somebody would like to bring up, it's a kind of different perspective, perhaps. Anyone?
Yeah.
In the back here? Can you speak up? I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, wait for the mic.
Thank you.
Oh, Saskatchewan.
I kind of wish I hadn't put my hand up now. I completely embrace what you're saying, and I noticed that you come from a transpersonal institute. And what I'm wondering is that we have a tradition of transpersonal psychotherapy. So why do we need clinical?
Why is this
parapsychology.
different? I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
My experience with transpersonal is that, with the exception of a few people like Charlie Tart, it's not really addressed. It's thought of as a spiritual emergence or a spiritual emergency. Let me give you an example of the difference between a psi disturbance, spiritual emergency, and what I call a trauma-induced spiritual awakening, for example. And just also, when we're looking at the psychokinetics as well, let me just go back here. One of the things that we can offer is normalizing paranormal phenomena or anomalous phenomena when they arise. So here I'm demonstrating for this group doing inner work and hands-on healing work. And people were being trained to be able to stand and be present and extend hands-on healing. I'm working right now with a fellow who, now this I admit is anecdotal, but nonetheless, he had lost his mother in the tsunami. We were doing a piece of energy work. My translator had the microphone to his mouth so that people could hear him. Suddenly, the channels changed on the amplifier. It was the only time it happened in the 2-week training. And music started blaring across the room. So everybody's scuffling, trying to turn it off. I asked my translator, what's the song that's playing? It's in Achinese. She asked one of the Achinese because she was translating in Indonesian, Bahasa Indonesia. Turns out the song that was playing was a song about mother's love. Now, it could be that that's just a synchronicity. That's what transpersonal psychology would call it. And calling it a synchronicity diminishes the possibility of perhaps something else happening. So that's one example of the distinction between transpersonal and parapsychological.
I was thinking more about transpersonal psychotherapy, not psychology.
Okay. Well, no, absolutely. In transpersonal psychotherapy, it depends on the therapist and how they integrate these skills and resources. And many, one of the trainees that I worked with, who was a medium actually, went for a master's in counseling, and in supervising her, she certainly is somebody who is going to be integrating mediumship as well as wonderful skills as a marriage and family therapist and psychology. And I do believe that this is the trend of the future, especially since we're seeing such a wellspring of interest in the general public, as well as a wellspring of experience. So people are looking to find how to integrate these. And I think, is that about it for my time?
Yeah, that's good.
Good. So I do want to just end with a very short story from the First Nations. The First Nations have something called the medicine wheel, which you might be familiar with. Not all of them have the medicine wheel, but the Mohawk Nation does. And it describes that in the east is our spirit. And we know when we're in balance with our spirit, when we can trust our perception and our spiritual resources. In the south is the physical world, which relates to our physical body, our health, our actions, our home environment, and work environment. In the west is our emotional world, which represents our motives and our desires, our fears and our needs. And in the north is the mental world, which represents the stories we tell, healing stories or not so healing, and how do we integrate the wisdom from the elders and ancestors. And in the center of the wheel is the earth, and it's about our relationship. In some cultures, it's the cosmos. So at the center is energy. Now, what my Mohawk friend, who has given me permission to share this story, and permission is how you show respect in Mohawk Nation and throughout the indigenous cultures, is that if on a bicycle you have a puncture anywhere on that wheel where it doesn't allow the fullness of that experience to be present, well, the wheel's going to go flat. And I think we're dealing with a little bit of a wobbly wheel in North America and in Western scientific circles. Thank you very much.